In less than a single minute, an entire city vanished. A blinding flash tore through the morning sky, and silence followed where life had once filled the streets. That morning, in August 1945, the world crossed into the nuclear age. 8 decades later, Hiroshima and Nagasaki still cast a shadow over humanity, a reminder of what happens when science, war, and desperation collide. World War II was already the deadliest conflict in human history. Nazi Germany had been defeated, but in the Pacific, Japan continued to fight on with ferocity. Cities across the country lay in ruins from relentless firebombing, yet the Japanese military refused to surrender. Millions feared the war would drag on for years, costing untold more lives. In that moment of exhaustion and urgency, the United States prepared to unleash a weapon so powerful that it promised to end the war, but at a price history would never forget. At the center of this story lies the Manhattan Project, the largest scientific and military effort ever attempted at that time. It would produce the world's first atomic bombs, weapons capable of leveling cities with a single strike. To understand what happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, we must first step back to the deserts of New Mexico, where the world's first man-made sun was born, the Manhattan Project. The Manhattan Project began in 1942, fueled by the fear that Nazi Germany might develop nuclear weapons first. For years, scientists had studied the mysteries of the atom, and by the late 1930s, German researchers had discovered nuclear fission, the splitting of the atom's nucleus. This discovery meant it was possible to release unimaginable amounts of energy. If weaponized, it could decide the fate of the war. The United States responded with urgency. Entire secret cities were constructed in remote corners of the country. At Los Alamos, in New Mexico, the world's brightest physicists gathered under the leadership of J. Robert Oppenheimer, a man who would later be called the father of the atomic bomb. Oak Ridge, Tennessee, became a massive industrial complex where uranium was enriched, while Hanford, Washington, produced the crucial plutonium. These sites were heavily guarded, hidden even from many of the workers inside them. Thousands labored day and night, often without knowing what they were building. General Leslie Groves, the military commander of the project, pushed relentlessly. He brought together Nobel Prize-winning scientists like Enrico Fermi, Niels Bohr, and Ernest Lawrence. Their mission: turn theory into a weapon of war. After years of secrecy, calculation, and sleepless nights, the moment of truth came on July 16, 1945, in the Jornada del Muerto desert of New Mexico. Scientists gathered for the Trinity test. At 5:29 a.m., a device nicknamed the Gadget detonated with a force equal to 21,000 tons of TNT. The desert was instantly illuminated as if the sun itself had risen. The explosion created a fireball more than 200 meters wide. Its shockwave felt miles away. Oppenheimer later recalled a verse from Hindu scripture, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." The test proved what many had feared and hoped. The atomic bomb was real, and it worked. News of the test reached President Harry Truman at the Potsdam Conference in Germany, where he was meeting with Winston Churchill and Joseph Stalin. When Truman learned the bomb had succeeded, his confidence changed overnight. The United States now held a weapon of unimaginable power, and with it, the ability to end the war on its own terms, political decisions, and target selection. But with the weapon ready, difficult questions followed. Where would it be used? And against whom? On July 24th, Truman hinted to Stalin that the United States had developed a weapon of unusual destructive force. Stalin, already informed through Soviet espionage, showed little surprise. Still, the signal was clear. The bomb would soon enter the war. 2 days later, the United States, Britain, and China issued the Potsdam Declaration. It demanded that Japan surrender unconditionally or face prompt and utter destruction. The declaration promised Japan would not be enslaved and would be allowed to rebuild, but its military must disarm, and war criminals would face justice. The Japanese leadership, however, was divided. Some officials wanted to negotiate through the Soviet Union, still neutral in the Pacific War. Others insisted on continuing the fight. In the end, they chose silence, neither accepting nor rejecting the Allied terms. Meanwhile, the U.S. military had already prepared the target list. Hiroshima, Nagata, and Nagasaki were selected. Kyoto was spared after Secretary of War Henry Stimson personally intervened. Arguing its cultural and academic importance made it essential for Japan's post-war recovery. Tokyo, already devastated by months of firebombing, was also excluded. Hiroshima, largely untouched and militarily significant, became the first target. On July 25th, Truman approved the order. Atomic bombs would be dropped as soon as weather permitted. Beginning after August 3rd, Hiroshima, August 6, 1945. In the early hours of August 6, 1945, a silver B-29 bomber named the Enola Gay lifted off from Tinian Island in the Pacific. Piloted by Colonel Paul Tibbets, the aircraft carried the world's first combat-ready atomic bomb. The bomb, nicknamed Little Boy, weighed nearly 4,400 kilograms and used uranium-235 to unleash destructive power, equivalent to 15,000 tons of TNT. Accompanying the Enola Gay were 2 other planes, the Great Artiste, equipped with instruments to measure the blast and necessary evil, tasked with photographing and documenting the mission. After a 6-hour flight, they reached the Japanese mainland. A reconnaissance plane had already confirmed clear skies over Hiroshima. The city's fate was sealed. At 7:09 a.m., Japanese radar detected the small formation. Sirens wailed, but when officials realized only 3 planes were present, they assumed it was a reconnaissance flight and canceled the alert. Life in Hiroshima resumed as normal. At 8:15 a.m., Bombardier Thomas Farabee locked onto his target, the Aioi Bridge, near the city center. He released Little Boy for 43 seconds. The bomb fell silently through the sky before detonating at an altitude of 600 meters, in a fraction of a second. Hiroshima was engulfed in a blinding flash brighter than the sun. A fireball 200 meters wide vaporized everything at ground zero. Concrete buildings were ripped apart. Wooden homes vanished in flames. Human shadows were permanently burned into walls and pavement. Then a radius of 1.7 kilometers, almost nothing, remained standing. An estimated 70,000 to 80,000 people died instantly. Thousands more suffered burns so severe that skin peeled away in strips. Windows shattered miles away, injuring countless others. Fires spread across the city, feeding on the wooden structures, creating a firestorm that burned for hours. Survivors stumbled through the ruins, many fatally wounded. Their city turned to ash in moments. That same day, President Truman addressed the world. His message was both proud and chilling. If Japan did not surrender, it could expect a reign of ruin from the air, the like of which has never been seen on this earth. The United States had unveiled its new weapon and made clear it was prepared to use it again. Japan's response. Despite the destruction of Hiroshima, Japan's leaders hesitated. Some argued the United States could not possibly have more bombs. Others clung to the hope that the Soviet Union might mediate peace on terms more favorable than unconditional surrender. But the reality was closing in. The Soviets were preparing their own strike, and the U.S. was readying a second atomic bomb. Nagasaki, August 9, 1945. Just 3 days after Hiroshima was destroyed, another mission prepared to launch from Tinian Island. This time, the aircraft was a B-29 bomber called Boxcar, piloted by Major Charles Sweeney. On board was Fat Man, a plutonium-based implosion bomb, more advanced and more powerful than the uranium weapon dropped on Hiroshima. Its destructive yield was about 21 kilotons. The mission did not go smoothly. Shortly after takeoff, Boxcar faced technical problems. A malfunctioning fuel pump left hundreds of gallons unusable, adding tension to an already dangerous flight. Over Japan, the crew's first target, the city of Kokura, was covered in smoke. 3 times they failed, trying to locate their aiming point. Each time, anti-aircraft fire grew more accurate. Piled and smoke obscured the target. Finally, low on fuel and pressed for time, they turned toward their secondary target, Nagasaki. At 11:02 a.m., the bomb bay doors opened. Fat Man fell for 47 seconds before detonating about 500 meters above the city. A nuclear fireball, hotter than the surface of the sun, erupted in an instant. Buildings crumbled, factories collapsed, and tens of thousands of people vanished in the blinding flash. Of course, the hills surrounding Nagasaki contained some of the destruction, but the devastation was still catastrophic. Around 40,000 people died instantly. By the end of 1945, the death toll in Nagasaki had reached between 60,000 and 80,000, for the second time in 3 days. Japan had experienced the unimaginable. Entire cities erased in seconds, 2 warnings in fire and ash. The Soviet entry, while Nagasaki burned, another blow struck Japan. On August 8, 1945, just hours before the bombing, the Soviet Union declared war on Japan. That night, Soviet armies poured across the borders of Manchuria, smashing through Japanese defenses. For Tokyo's leadership, it was a nightmare scenario. Their last hope, Soviet mediation for peace, was gone. Instead, Tae faced overwhelming Soviet force on land and atomic devastation from the air. The Japanese cabinet could no longer ignore reality. They debated surrender, but many military leaders resisted, insisting on fighting to the bitter end. The deadlock only broke when Emperor Hirohito himself intervened, something unprecedented in Japanese history. In his first ever radio address to the people, he acknowledged defeat. His voice, calm yet heavy, told the nation that Japan must endure the unendurable and accept surrender. For millions of Japanese citizens, it was the first time they had ever heard their emperor's voice. Japan's surrender. On August 15, 1945, Japan announced its unconditional surrender. Across the world, celebrations erupted. In the United States, crowds filled the streets, waving flags and cheering. In Britain, church bells rang. In the Pacific, weary soldiers wept with relief. After nearly 6 years of global war, World War II was finally over. The formal surrender came weeks later. On September 2, 1945, aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay, Japanese officials signed the document of surrender in front of Allied representatives. General Douglas MacArthur, Supreme Commander of the Allied forces, declared, "Today the guns are silent. A great tragedy has ended. A great victory has been won." The Second World War was officially over, but the nuclear age had just begun. The human cost. The devastation of Hiroshima and Nagasaki was not confined to the moment of the blasts. Survivors, known as Hibakusha, carried scars, both visible and invisible, for the rest of their lives. Many suffered from severe burns, radiation sickness, and cancers that appeared months or years later. The children were born with defects. Families struggled with grief and stigma. Hibakusha were often shunned in post-war Japan due to fears of radiation. By the end of 1945, an estimated 200,000 people had died across the two cities. In the decades since, that number has grown, as radiation-related illnesses claimed more lives. Its survivors also became voices for peace, turning their suffering into testimony. They spoke at schools, international forums, and memorial events, urging the world never to repeat what happened. The ruins of Hiroshima were slowly rebuilt, but one structure was left standing, the skeletal dome of the Industrial Promotion Hall, near the bomb's hypocenter. Today it is preserved as the Hiroshima Peace Memorial, a symbol of both destruction and resilience. Nagasaki, too, rebuilt, with its Urakami Cathedral restored after being obliterated in the blast. These sites remain solemn reminders of the price humanity paid for the dawn of the nuclear era, legacy, and the nuclear age. Hiroshima and Nagasaki remain the only times nuclear weapons have been used in war, yet their impact shaped the entire second half of the 20th century. In the immediate aftermath, the world entered the Cold War. The United States and the Soviet Union built vast arsenals of nuclear weapons, each capable of destroying the world many times over. By the 1960s, thousands of warheads stood ready on both sides of the Iron Curtain. The doomsday clock, created by scientists of the Manhattan Project, ticked closer to midnight, symbolizing how near humanity stood to nuclear catastrophe. Crises like the Cuban Missile Standoff of 1962 brought the world to the edge, reminding leaders of the destructive lessons of 1945. Debates about the morality of Truman's decision still continue. Some argue the bombings saved millions of lives by ending the war quickly and avoiding a bloody invasion of Japan. Others call them unnecessary atrocities, a demonstration of power meant as much for the Soviets as for Japan. What is clear is that the bombings forced humanity to reckon with its own ability to annihilate itself. Every year, memorial ceremonies in Hiroshima and Nagasaki bring survivors, families, and leaders together. Bells are rung, lanterns float across rivers, names are read aloud. The message is always the same: never again. Conclusion: in just 43 seconds, Hiroshima was transformed into a wasteland. 3 days later, Nagasaki followed. Together, these events marked the most terrifying turning point in modern history. Years later, the shadow of those mushroom clouds still lingers. The story of Hiroshima and Nagasaki is not just about destruction, it is about warning. A warning of what happens when human brilliance creates tools of extinction. It's a warning that the choice between survival and annihilation is still in our hands. The legacy of Hiroshima and Nagasaki lives not only in memorials, but that in every debate about nuclear weapons, every peace treaty signed, every protest march against war. It is a reminder that peace is fragile, and that once the line of nuclear war is crossed, there may be no return. If you found this story meaningful, Share it so others can learn from it. And don't forget to subscribe to the Infinital for more untold chapters of world history, as candles flicker in Hiroshima, as church bells ring in Nagasaki. The message of the Hibakusha echoes across generations. Never again.